2 days ago the world was shaken as Putin realized his pee-pee might seem a little smaller than his predecessors, so he invaded Ukraine in a desperate attempt to prove everyone otherwise. And you can become my friend today by subscribing to the channel so we can overthrow Putin together. Just not literally, cause I'm a little sissy and I don't want to die.
This is a story about regional domination and struggles between big powers, but really it's the story about what Vladimir Putin really wants. So let's go. A few months ago, Russia started sending more and more troops to this border. It's this massive border between Ukraine and Russia. They said they were doing a military exercise, but the rest of the world was like, yeah, we totally believe you, Russia. This was right before this big meeting where North American and European countries were coming together to talk about a lot of different things like these countries often do in these diplomatic summits. But soon, because of Russia's aggressive behavior coming in and setting up 100,000 troops on the border with Ukraine, the entire summit turned into a whole WTF Russia, what are you doing on the border of Ukraine meeting. Before the meeting, Putin comes out and says, listen, I have some demands for the West. And everyone's like, okay, Russia, what are your demands? You know, we have like COVID-19 right now and like that's like surging. So like, we don't need your like bluster about what your demands are. And Putin's like, no, here's my list of demands.
You know, Andrew, Joe Biden said it was important to come here and deal face-to-face with Vladimir Putin. He said there's no substitute for those face-to-face meetings. The takeaways here, though, were few in terms of concrete accomplishments. The one thing that they did agree to was to exchange ambassadors again. Remember, those ambassadors had been withdrawn amid the recent tensions, so that is a positive takeaway. They agreed to continue talking on nukes and on cybersecurity, so there's an ongoing dialogue there, no resolution here in Geneva. But there was this really intriguing moment yesterday in which Joe Biden said he hadn't issued any threats to Vladimir Putin on the cybersecurity front, but then he laid out a very detailed scenario about what might happen if the United States decided to embrace its robust cybersecurity capabilities and respond in kind. Here's what he said.
What happens if that ransomware outfit were sitting in Florida or Maine and took action, as I said, on their single lifeline to their economy, oil? It'd be devastating. And they're like, you could see them kind of go, oh, we'd do that, but like, whoa.
So that's Biden saying he didn't issue any threats, but it's sort of like saying, you know, that's an awfully nice pipeline you have there. It'd be a shame if anything happened to it. So clearly Biden suggesting that he laid down the law behind the scenes to Vladimir Putin, trying not to embarrass or humiliate him on the world stage. In fact, treating him like a peer very much on the world stage. Biden says he issued 16 specific areas in terms of cybersecurity and U.S. critical infrastructure that are off limits. And he laid down very specific terms of what would happen if Russian attackers hit those. So that's sort of where the cybersecurity debate stands. For his part, Vladimir Putin said that this was, in fact, a productive meeting.
We don't share the same positions in many areas, but I think that both of these sides showed a willingness to understand one another and to find ways to bring our positions closer together. The talks were quite constructive.
Putin's demands for the summit were this. Number one, that NATO, which is this big military alliance between US, Canada, and Europe, stop expanding, meaning they don't let any new members in. Okay? So Russia's like, no more new members to your like cool military club that I don't like. You can't have any more members.
After the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact, NATO should have sensibly restructured itself. There were plans that at times did not even exclude Russia's membership. NATO was originally founded as a defense alliance.
Die NATO war mal als Verteidigungsbündnis gegründet worden. Nur der Feind, also Sowjetunion oder Russland, der existierte ja nicht.
Only the enemy, namely the Soviet Union or Russia, no longer existed. So a new task was needed, and the out-of-area missions, meaning operations outside one's own territory, were proclaimed. From my perspective, that was the beginning of the end. Instead of including the vast Russia in some way in security policy, NATO did not change structurally, but merely expanded eastward. There was the NATO-Russia Council, but it was more of a cosmetic correction and not participation on equal terms. The NATO eastward expansion was, in any case, one of the biggest mistakes since the end of World War II.
War jedenfalls einer der größten Fehler seit dem Ende des Zweiten Weltkriegs.
Number 2, that NATO withdraw all of their troops from anywhere in Eastern Europe. Basically, Putin is saying, I can veto any military cooperation or troops going between countries that have to do with Eastern Europe, the place that used to be the Soviet Union, okay? And number 3, Putin demands that America vow not to protect its allies in Eastern Europe with nuclear weapons. LOL, said all of the other countries. You're literally nuts, Vladimir Putin. Like, these are the most ridiculous demands ever.
I must tell you, the tone of the entire meetings, I guess it was a total of 4 hours, was good, positive. There wasn't any strident action taken.
But there he is, Putin, with these demands, these very, very aggressive demands. And he sort of is implying that if his demands aren't met, he's going to invade Ukraine. And it's like the boyfriend who genuinely loves his girlfriend. They had a great relationship, but they broke up. And she's free to see whomever she wants. But Putin is not ready to let go.
What the hell's wrong with you? I love you, Jessica. What the hell is wrong with you, dude? Don't fucking touch me. I love you, dude. World star!
Ukraine, obviously, it's a victim of Russian aggression. It's been waiting for the peace for 3 years now. Russia had no reason to invade Ukraine whatsoever, and Ukraine has been defending itself. The sooner the war ends, the better for Ukraine. The second player is Russia. Russia, at this point, has a lower hand in this upcoming negotiations because it has depleted all, nearly all possible resources. Russian economy is crumbling. Russia has run into a large federal budget deficit. Money's run out. All the savings accounts that it had are dry now, empty. Russians, there aren't enough people to go and fight in the front lines. So basically, Russia is falling apart. And what it has been doing for the past 3 years, it's not sustainable. It cannot last long.
Для России как раз-таки война, длинная война, затяжная война с большим количеством всплесков в этой войне крайне важна сейчас. Это единственная концепция их выживания. То есть, опять же, они должны существовать в этой войне долго, годами. Почему? Потому что тогда они могут туда отправлять контингент, этот контингент будет какие-то деньги зарабатывать, то есть они будут это все финансировать. Этому контингенту, который может воевать, ему надо реализовать свою агрессию. Для русского мира свойственно вот это абсолютно такое нечеловеческая животная страсть убивать и насиловать и грабить.
No one in Russia needed this war, except for one person. So when I say Russia in relations to the war with Ukraine, I mean Putin. And I want you to know that. But make no mistake, I still think that all Russians, myself included, are responsible.
Если бы России не было, ее следовало бы выдумать. Причем вот именно такую страшную и ужасную. Потому что мы можем быть какими угодно, но Западу мы нужны именно такими.
Bitte bedenken Sie dabei auch, dass für alle Verbrechen und Verletzungen.
Please also consider that for all the crimes and violations committed by the Soviet Union, the West has generally held Russia responsible. All other states that emerged after the dissolution of the Soviet Union were given the chance by the West for a more or less unburdened new beginning. But not Russia. This fundamental attitude is not insignificant, as it forms the basis for quickly reviving old enemy images.
The most important thing to understand about the war in Ukraine is that it's not a war about territory. It is by far the biggest misconception about the war, that it's a conflict over who gets to keep the most territory once the war is over. If you look at the Western media, almost all the articles will be discussing the war in this way. That's why I keep stressing this point whenever I make these videos. It is simply wrong to understand it as primarily a war about territory.
Many think that Russia needs Ukraine for the land, for the resources. Now, this is a very wrong opinion. And this is why. Russia is extremely rich in two things: land and natural resources. Look at the map to see how huge the territory of Russia is. Russia is the largest country in the world, with people occupying just a small portion of it, west of the Ural Mountains. Russia is also immensely rich in resources, all kinds of resources. It is number 7 in the world in proven oil reserves and number 1 in the world in proven natural gas reserves. Russia has incredible reserves of gold, silver.
This flow of gas towards Germany and Europe across this complex system of pipelines provides critical revenues for the Russian government to function and provides critical heat for European cities during the winter. And so both sides heavily rely upon the other here. Any disruption in this trade relationship would be disastrous from Moscow's perspective, and Ukraine is the most likely place for such a disruption to happen in the future. Back during the Soviet times, when Russia and Ukraine were both one country, pipelines were built across Ukraine almost like a bridge that transported gas directly from the Siberian sources to the customers in Europe.
Diamonds, copper, ores of different kinds, cobalt, uranium, you name it, Russia has it. Russia has this vast lands used for agriculture. It has so much good land, and some of it is considered the standard, the gold standard for agriculture. It's called Chernozem, the black land. It very well could be the bread basket of the entire world if it had proper business conditions and proper management, of course. Russia's serious problem is too few people. 146 million people occupy the largest country in the world. There simply aren't enough people to discover, extract, and process all the resources that the country has. Now, Russia certainly does not need Ukrainian land and resources. By taking even entire Ukraine, let's imagine that Russia somehow occupied the entire Ukraine. And it, in this case, it gains access to some resources, some land. That's not much compared to what Russia already has. But the risks of being ostracized, of being made pariah, of being placed under all international sanctions, and basically being isolated from the rest of the world are enormous. Why would Russia risk all of that just for the land solely?
Significantly more menacing to the perspective of Moscow was the discovery, for the first time in early 2012, that Ukraine's exclusive economic zone within the Black Sea may contain more than 2 trillion cubic meters worth of natural gas, largely concentrated around the Crimean Peninsula. To make matters even more interesting, further technological advancements in the early 2010s that enabled the successful drilling of natural gas and oil from shale rock unlocked the potential shale gas hotspots for Ukraine around Donetsk and Kharkiv in the east and around the Carpathians in the west. Beginning in 2012, there was suddenly a very real possibility that almost out of nowhere, Ukraine had the world's 14th largest reserves of natural gas, just behind Australia and Iraq. But as a relatively poor country, Ukraine lacked the finances, the technology, or the equipment to successfully harvest any of these resources in any large quantities. But that all changed when, shortly afterwards, the Ukrainian government began granting exploration and drilling rights to the likes of Shell and Exxon. It was suddenly possible that within a few years, these Western companies would enable Ukraine to transform into Europe's second petrostate, which would have not only been a direct and serious competitor to Russia's own gas supply to the European Union, and thus at the same time a major threat to the Russian government's budget and GDP.
What the war is really about is political influence over all of Ukraine, and that's the key to understanding Russia's war aims as well, what it is they're fighting for. When Putin launched the invasion in 2022, he didn't have the ambition to conquer all of Ukraine and to make it a part of Russia. The goal was to achieve regime change in Ukraine and to insert a government that would be more sort of favorable to Russia and that would be under Putin's control.
One big nothing. Read my lips. Russians need nothing from Ukraine. Russia's Tsar, Vladimir Putin, does. Putin needs political control over Ukraine. He needs Ukraine as an independent country that exists on the political map of the world, independent on paper. He needs Ukraine as an ally promoting Russia's interests in the region. He needs a loyal government, perhaps puppet government. You can put it whatever you want. He needs a loyal government. He could influence the government that takes his orders, perhaps recommendations, perhaps suggestions. He needs a buffer between the West and Russia.
So Ukraine would still formally be an independent country, but it would be a part of Russia's sphere of influence. It would be like a part of what the Russians like to call the near abroad, where they have extended political influence and they can dictate the politics in the areas where they see a need to do so.
He needs a tool to influence Moldova, Georgia, and other countries.
In 2012, at the time when these discoveries were initially made, the man in charge of Ukraine was Viktor Yanukovych, a pro-Russian politician who was keeping Ukraine more politically aligned with the interests of Moscow. So long as he was president, these discoveries were not directly threatening to Russia.
Ukraine has signed a shale gas production sharing agreement with US firm Chevron. It's another step in Kiev's drive for more energy independence from Russia, with the president, Viktor Yanukovych, saying that Ukraine could be self-sufficient in gas by 2020. This follows a similar agreement with Royal Dutch Shell in January. Currently, Ukraine pays high prices for gas imported from Russia. The Oleska field covers over 5,000 kilometers, but getting shale gas out won't be quick or cheap. Chevron will spend 300 million euros over the next 3 to 5 years exploring to check the reserves and their availability. There are no guarantees. Hopes for shale reserves in neighbouring Poland have been very sharply downsized, and Chevron pulled out of a shale exploration tender in Lithuania.
U.S. energy giant Chevron has abandoned its multi-million-dollar project to produce shale gas in Ukraine. Company officials quoted in the Kyiv Post said Ukraine's complicated tax legislation was one of the main reasons for terminating the contract. Chevron was obliged to invest $350 million over 5 years into exploring and drilling wells at the Oleska field, located in the western Ukrainian regions of Lviv and Ivano-Frankivsk. Government officials say the scrapping of the deal is a blow to Ukraine's drive for energy independence after years of dependence on Moscow. Chevron had also planned to extract gas from the rocks in eastern Ukraine, but most operations have been on hold since Russian-backed insurgency began in the region in April.
Royal Dutch Shell is warning of significantly lower profits. New boss, Ben van Beurden, 2 weeks into the job, has detailed multiple problems and challenges. He's announced a probable cut in fourth quarter earnings to $2.9 billion from market expectations of about $4 billion. Analysts say Shell appears to have suffered a perfect storm in the last 3 months, including weaker profits from refining oil, higher production costs and output stoppages in Nigeria.
Burisma is the leading independent exploration and production company operating in the Ukrainian oil and gas market. It was founded in 2002. Burisma is striving to become an active market player across Europe as well as worldwide, and to stand out by virtue of its values and experience. Burisma is seeking to strengthen its role in the field of global energy development, with an emphasis on exploiting new technology. Our gas fields are located in key oil and gas regions of Ukraine. The fields are in close proximity to the major gas pipelines and are fully connected to them. Our key corporate governance principles: leadership, efficiency, remuneration, transparency.
To make matters even worse from Ukraine's perspective, the areas of Ukraine that are the most rich in shale gas are located very near to the most major conflict zones encouraged and funded from Moscow, with the Donetsk and Luhansk rebellions here and the Transnistria breakaway republic in Moldova over here, which, in my view, is not a coincidence.
The Moldovan Transnistrian conflict traces its roots to the dissolution of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, when Moldova declared independence. As Moldova veered towards unification with Romania, the region of Transnistria, with a large pro-Russian population, opposed this movement. In 1992, tensions erupted into a brief but intense conflict, lasting approximately 4 months, involving Moldovan forces and Transnistrian separatists backed by Russian troops. Despite a ceasefire brokered in July 1992, with Russian military presence mediating the peace, the conflict remains unresolved to this day.
What happens if that ransomware outfit were sitting in Florida or Maine and took action, as I said, on their single lifeline to their economy, oil? It'd be devastating. And they're like, you could see them kind of go, oh, we'd do that, but like, whoa.
Кто-нибудь считает, что, так сказать, Китайская Народная Республика будет исповедовать что-нибудь, кроме своих интересов? Кто-нибудь считает, что Иран и Турцию удастся вместе гармонизировать? Это кто-то наивный человек. Значит, мы существуем в ситуации по сложности больше, чем во Вторую мировую войну. Мы должны к этому готовиться.